Do I care what people think? No. I had parents who messed up but did their best. It is what it is. Hi, my name is Hazel. I'm a freelance writer and editor, and I'm adopted.
Hi, I'm Melanie, and I'm a writer and lecturer. I'm also an adoptive mom of an 11-year-old boy. When I married my husband, we went for the genetic testing, and there was this already an awareness that both of us had this condition known as thalassemia minor. So there was already a warning from the doctor that would be a risk if we wanted to have a child, that the child would have thalassemia major, which is quite a fatal condition. Even when we tried to get pregnant a few years later, what happened was that I had all these other range of fertility issues. So on top of that, the genetic risk, I just didn't feel comfortable, like going through things like IVF, knowing that there was going to be such a high risk of everything. And this was something we decided to explore after discovering all these circumstances.
That's amazing, actually. Wow.
It was very administrative, and me and my husband were generally not very admin kind of people. So it took a while to get the application going because basically applying for adoption requires applying for a home study report, and that requires a lot of information from financial to health and all that. Actually, once we were approved, we got the home study report. That's kind of like your pass to adopt a child in Singapore. Within 2 weeks, we adopted a child. So it was really fast once everything was greenlit. But of course, the process to get all that paperwork probably took about 6 months. My husband and I decided that it would be too emotionally gross for us to shop around for kids, like view multiple babies and then and then choose the best one. That was something I couldn't bring myself to do. So we just went with like the how circumstances and things unfolded. So in a way, I think there were a lot of emotions, but because it happened so fast, we actually never had a time to process them properly.
How did you feel preparing all that paperwork?
In doing all these, it did set this idea that parenthood requires all this responsibility. One thing really good is that our home study officer, who was, I think, from Touch Community Services, she's a social worker, but she was an adoptive mom herself. So I think even while she interviewed us, she also shared a lot of her personal experiences, and I felt that was actually very reassuring. And so even when we cleared and got that home study report approved, it's like we were a bit stunned on what to do, but she actually kind of told us, okay, so now you can call MSF, and she said you can also contact the private adoption agencies. And it just so happened when I called that person, the guy was like, oh, we have a baby that just arrived from Indonesia, do you want to see him? And so that's why it was so fast.
Right.
Yes.
It's very eye-opening, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's how it worked here. Very dramatic.
Yeah.
At the point when I found out I was adopted, I was already partially estranged from my adoptive parents.
Oh.
I'm from Malaysia originally. So I've lived in Singapore for about 15, 16 years. The pandemic sort of ruined our lives in a way, because I was stuck here for work and we couldn't go back. A lot of long-standing tensions in the family just sort of brought it all up, right? So when I found out, I was actually not on speaking terms with them already. And it was somebody, I don't want to say who it was because the person is also no longer in my life. But we went out for dinner, and then he was asking me about all these things, about why aren't you speaking to this particular brother, what's happening? And I told him the whole story, and then he was like, I think I know why. And I'm like, okay, pray do tell. And then he told me the story, and sometimes when you are in a certain situation, your life flashes in front of your eyes. Mine popped up like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Just fit.
And it just fit. My parents were wonderful people, but I grew up feeling like I never fit in. And my parents knew my birth parents, so they knew each other. It's within the family. And it made sense when I went to that person's house, and I was like, oh, this fits. Why does this fit? It doesn't make sense, And in that moment, it was just...
What age did you know, actually?
So I found out when I was 33. And how it actually works is my fathers are brothers, biological brothers. Yeah. The story that I got is that my adoptive parents, we'll call them parents set A and set B. Set A basically had one son, and then they couldn't have any more. So my mom had a series of miscarriages, and and they really wanted another child. For some odd reason, Dad was very against adopting from an orphanage or from outside the family. And set B, my birth parents, said, okay, why don't you adopt one of ours? So from the stories I've heard, on the day of my birth, my adoptive parents showed up at the hospital and they took me home and never spoke of it again. So yeah, and it became like a family secret in that sense. So on my birth certificate, it doesn't say that I'm adopted. So I never knew at all. And it was just a feeling of just not fitting in. Like, it's mom and dad, but why don't I belong?
Just a niggling
It's just a very
feeling.
niggling feeling. So I'm firmly convinced at one point that had I just been told a few years earlier, I would have found a way to sit both parents down and talk about it, you know. Ultimately, what broke down over the years was just communication.
So if you had the chance to sit all four of them down, what kind of conversation actually do you really want to have?
I think it wouldn't be so much of asking, why did you do this and why did you lie, but more a question of sort of like a custody agreement, if you will. Like, how do we move forward from here? Are we all able to put our problems on the table? Are we going to discuss this as adults? It cannot be a case of I'm spending Christmas with you, but I'm spending New Year's with them. We're family, you know. How are we going to figure this out? And how is it going to work? Because where do I fit into this picture? And even if space is made, is it really that I'm in the circle, or am I just a little bit outside that circle? Not just a case of, okay, you're the biggest victim in the situation, you're the most affected, what do you want? Because that breeds resentment down the road.
I wrote this picture book series called The Adventures of Squirky the Alien when my son was around 2 years old. I had been advised by other adoptive parents that you can actually start talking to your kids about adoption from 2 to 3 years old. They can actually understand it in a very basic way. So I was also in the library a lot, and when I actually tried to look for books on adoption, it's all very Western. It's always like white families or animals and stuff. So I decided to do something a bit quirky because I know that my son also liked aliens, space aliens at that time. So I did a space alien story with The Adventures of Squirky the Alien. When I would read this story to him, bedtime story, he said, Squirky is me. Like he could already it's me. And what I would do differently now is actually probably be more aware of the emotional gap, because he can't deal with certain things very well. He can't deal with being alone, he can't deal with being abandoned, and I feel like that's only something I found out much later on when I think I could have been a bit more sensitive to it, even as I was telling him he's adopted, that actually abandonment was such a raw thing. I think moving forward, he's going to his teen years, I don't know what to expect. I feel like as a parent, you're just learning something new every day, but I think it will probably come out in new ways. And the baseline is that I need to be very sensitive to how safe he's feeling. Hopefully we can communicate with each other as parent and child. Doing it as honestly as possible, and also doing it in a place that is quiet, hopefully, and on a day where the child is relatively calm and stuff, that might be a suitable time to reveal such news, because obviously it's quite big news. For some kids, just once is fine, and then if you bring it up again, they're like, yeah, but I know already. Whereas some other kids are like, you have to actually tell them constantly, if not they might forget, or are not willing to accept it just yet. So I think it's adapting with the times, and I would say that revealing to your child is not a one-off thing in a lot of cases. So prepare that it will be an ongoing conversation, probably till adulthood.
I'm going to have to agree with that. I think we're naturally going to have a lot of questions. We're going to want to know all the little things. If there's anything I could suggest or redo, is just to not be afraid to confront those big questions, and to not be afraid to support your child, and to be understanding enough that they will want answers, and there will be answers that as adoptive parents you will not be able to provide. Make peace with that, and find a way to support your child as best as possible. Don't keep it a secret, I think keeping secrets does a lot of damage in the long run.
There are some kids who actually avoid. They just don't want to deal with it now, and I think you have to respect that boundary. So yes, you might reveal it to them, but it looks like they're not really prepared to go deeper into it, or come to terms with it a bit more. Then I think it's good to also give that space, like
Yes.
like whenever you're ready,
I
then we
agree.
can talk about
Yeah.
it. So I think they are accepting that this is not a bad family arrangement to make for children who need families, right?
Yeah.
But it's not something they want to keep talking about. Like, why are you like just hanging out your dirty laundry, so to say?
Yeah.
I'm glad that I think in the past 2 years, the government has been a bit more forthcoming about this and also offering more support to adoptive parents. But I would definitely love to see more conversations about adoptees themselves. Like, there's not much heard about the children's point of view. So for me, what I noticed with some of my friends is that they try to not talk about me being an adoptive parent after a while. Because when they talk to me about parenting stuff, it's always like this and that and that. It's only like maybe if one of them has a baby and wants to talk about breastfeeding, then I'm like, I cannot relate, right? But other than that, they don't like differentiate me because I'm an adoptive parent. When they talk about parenting, it's like we all share the same challenges. I think in general, I do feel like sometimes when I try to explain with my friends about my son feeling insecure about certain things, they don't quite understand that. And I think that's something they will never understand because they've never really been through it. Yeah. So I do feel a bit lonely in that. But fortunately, I have a few adoptive parent friends who are, who talk to me about this. You're kind of like, you're not really in that narrow path in Singapore society. You'll always be kind of a bit out of it. And that has made me care a lot less about what other people think. I have to understand that they don't understand sometimes. And I think it's this fear sometimes of like amplifying, perhaps they see it's like over focusing on issues. But I think especially with adoption, where like you said, it's a gap that is small but it's also really deep.
Yeah.
You need to address it when it shows. You can't, if not, it will just grow, it will grow.
It'll grow, exactly. Yeah. I just sort of went from caring what people thought about me to not giving.
Yeah, you care a lot less, right? You really
yeah,
care a lot
stopped.
less.
I stopped. Thank you.
Because it is a very fundamental shift. So that makes you change your mindset. You start to care a lot less about what society thinks.
As I started to like reshape who I was as a person and what I wanted from life, people's opinions about me being adopted just stopped mattering. Ultimately, the question just became, am I okay with this newfound status, if you will? Do I care what people think? And the answer to both questions was no. It made no difference. I had parents who messed up but did their best, you know, and as long as I can go to sleep at night and I wake up comfortable with the fact that this is my story, that's all that matters.
On top of that, I'm really glad that you also making that effort to find the help you need. That sometimes you cannot get it from family.
Not only did it help me figure out my place in how the family worked, but also how the world would see me being so open about all these things, writing these stories and telling people, all of this stuff. It did kind of feel like, what if these people are thinking, oh, she's milking it for her attention, or, she just wants, people to like listen to her, but that's not it at all. When I stopped caring, I'm like, if you don't want to accept it and if you don't want to deal with it as a member of society, those of us that want to speak up will do so. And somewhere along the way, it'll find the place where it needs to go.
And I think when you tell stories from that place, right, not so much about getting attention or fame or clout or what, but you just want the story to be out there to connect with other people who might be in similar plights or issues.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
For me personally, there hasn't been any negativity or any stigma per se. Like, people have been very like, oh wow, okay, this happened.
For me as well, no stigma, but it's happened to a friend who was an adoptive mom, where she really felt hurt in her workplace when other colleagues got pregnant. They got the whole like full hamper, the 4 weeks leave, and when she adopted a boy, and also very last minute, nothing was acknowledged, and she had to take no pay leave to take care of the boy at first.
Oh, that's not right.
And that only happened like a few years ago. So I feel that there is stigma. It didn't happen to me because I'm also like freelancer, but for her, she really felt that difference in treatment. I felt hurt for her.
Yeah,
that she couldn't get her adoption leave approved. The birth baby hamper thing all didn't come to her because he was adopted. There's definitely this huge lack of understanding, and indirect treatments reveal a severe lack of understanding. And I do hope that with the government initiated adoption, I'm quite encouraged by them, because it would normalize it a lot more. Like adoption leave got longer and things like that.
Ask without assumptions. They attach an assumption of what I would feel or think to the question. Don't do that. You don't know what I'm thinking. And as somebody who's adopted, your feelings are a constant roller coaster. So just be a little mindful of what you ask.
Yeah, like you said, the loaded questions really get to me, but I'm also seeing that it's because of ignorance, and it's because of all these entrenched misconceptions about adoption that's why these loaded questions come about. I try to be more patient, so I do sometimes because of those picture books, I do get these questions from other adoptive parents or parents who are looking to adopt, and some of the questions sometimes are a bit like, but I do try to be patient, because like I said, it's a topic that it still needs a lot of unraveling in society, right? And that's why we're here now.
If you're looking to adopt, 2 thumbs up for you, because it's not easy. It's hard enough to get along with people you're biologically related to, much less when you bring in a person who is from an entirely different environment. Just keep an open mind, and just understand that on that path, nobody else's opinions but yours matter. And after a while, even your opinion won't matter, because it's what's good for your child that will be the most important thing you have to consider.
I really sometimes forget that I am an adoptive parent, that I adopted this child, or most days my son, it feels like my son. We are a family, and sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
I really do hope that, in these next few years, or for the rest of your life maybe, that you will find people that that you feel safe enough as if they are like your family, because it's a lonely place in this world. And like I said, biological relations sometimes don't cut it. I also hope that you get those questions somehow answered, if not from your parents A and parents B, from other family members. All of us actually, regardless of what issues we're dealing with, we're all in this constant process of healing, but especially adoption, which is such a fundamental loss.
Yeah.
I really hope that you find, these people that will
I'm good.
surround you with
I'm in a
love.
good place. So it's been fun, because now I just feel a little extra special. I have more parents and you don't. I think the topic of adoption is left unsaid because it simply goes against the grain of what society has told us is normal, of what people tell you is acceptable. It's years and years of conditioning. Like, if it's not biological, it's not normal. And that's why people don't want to talk about it.
The topic of adoption is definitely much more accepted now. It's a positive thing, because overall it's a child being able to be cared for by a family that is able to provide for him or her. But I do think that there is this hesitation to want to probe deeper into all the complex issues that come about with adoption, which in essence, there is some kind of tragedy, there is some kind of brokenness with, a child being separated from his or her biological parents. But that doesn't really get addressed enough, because there's this idea if it's such a hurtful thing, why must you keep bringing it up?
Even among us as adopted children, there's no conversation among us about how it feels. It's great, it's wonderful, we have a found family, Someone chose me to be their child. Whew, that's a flex. But it comes with its own burden, and a lot of it is very unspoken. But I do think the landscape is changing, especially as, my generation and, those younger than me start talking about found families, and how that is sometimes of greater value, if not equal to the people that you were born with. That's a beautiful thing. Thank you for watching this episode of What's Left Unsaid.
Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.
Bye!